I'm Tessa Booth from Armed and Styled.
And I'm Ernest Langdon from Langdon Tactical, and today we're talking about dry fire.
Are there any other specific tips and tricks you would recommend focusing on?
The two big things that I would say is that you need to be honest with yourself in dry fire. A lot of times we like to set times and do things really fast in dry fire, but we're not really being honest about what we see as far as our sights go and what we're feeling as far as our grip and all of those things. So that's a big one. Be honest with yourself. Don't try to start doing things faster than
Your ability.
And correct. And then the other piece is that I think is really important is I know a lot of people when they initially learn to shoot, they pin the trigger to the rear, they cycle the gun, and they start trying to, especially as part of our initial shooters, we're like, oh, this is what the gun does. You need to learn to reset the trigger and all that.
Yeah.
But when you're dry firing, you have to be careful of doing that, because what that does is it teaches you to pin the trigger to the rear and then not let go until you make a conscious decision to let go.
I will be totally honest with you and say that I'm absolutely still struggling with that. Like, I learned a lot of my initial shooting and gun manipulation in dry fire, and I absolutely learned to pin the trigger. And I've noticed that as I've really tried to pursue a higher level of proficiency, I'm really battling with trigger freeze. And so I actually would love any recommendations you have to offer trying to kind of back off of that bad habit in dry fire.
Again, it's quite simple.
Yeah.
When you pull the trigger, when the hammer of the striker falls, get off of the trigger. You don't have to fling your finger straight. I'm not telling you to fling your finger till it gets to the front of the trigger guard, but relax your finger and take that pressure off the trigger as a normal thing for you to do.
Yeah.
And that's gonna really help with that piece.
Do you find that that kind of starts to come more naturally as you start to pull the trigger faster? You almost naturally don't release it out that far because you're trying to get it faster, but when you go into trying to do it slowly, that's when the pinning really starts to come into play. Like, that's where I find that I'm struggling, is when I'm really trying to focus and I'm really trying to pull the trigger properly. What winds up happening is I pull it and I'm like, oh, I did a good trigger pull. Oh crap, I'm holding it back. It's kind of that thought process, but when I'm on the range and I'm trying to do something quickly, it does come more naturally where I can pull the trigger without having to release it out all the way.
I think that's a common thing when people are trying to be precise. They go in a little bit more precision mode and they'll hold the trigger to the rear. It's not that necessarily that is bad, but it creates other second and third order effects. So when I'm trying to make that transition between really fast shooting and really precise shooting, when I get those middle gray areas, that's when I have trigger freeze. That's when I don't reset the trigger and all that, because I'm still kind of pinning the trigger to be precise. Dry fire. It is so important from a skill set development standpoint.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that you're adding that into your program, and I highly suggest that other people do the same thing. It makes a huge difference in the skill development, and it's free.
Thank you so much for all of those tips.
You're welcome.
I've definitely been needing those, and I'm sure that you guys probably got some value out of that, and hopefully we addressed some things that resonated with you. Dry fire is extremely valuable, and it's something that we could all definitely benefit from spending more time in, as it's something that is free. We can do it in our own home, and we don't have to use ammunition on it. So check out the links below for more resources through the Beginner Shooter series, and go check out my channel, Armed and Styled, for even more resources.